Yes, we can hear you. Hello.
Okay, very good. Well, welcome to this question and answer session. The role of best seafood practices in meeting marketplace expectations. I'm Árni Matthíasson, and I will be managing this meeting this afternoon. I was asked to introduce myself. Well, I've done many things in my life, but probably most interesting in this context is that I worked on the trawlers here in Iceland. I've been a fish farmer. I've delivered my own fish to the shops here, which was a great thrill. I've also been a fisheries minister, and the last regular job that I held was as Assistant Director General at FAO and head of the Fisheries and Aquaculture Department. And now I'm based here at the Ocean Cluster as a senior advisor, but also a board member of the Global Seafood Alliance. So again, welcome. I'd like to also thank our sponsors for their participation and making this possible for us. And I would like then to see the next slide, Sean. This is our agenda for today. I will do some quick housekeeping, and then we will have two presentations. First about the marketplace expectations by Ian Sean, and then an introduction to the best seafood practices and the vessel standard by David Dietz, and then we'll have some question and answers, which those two gentlemen will reply to, as well as Mike Platt. Could you? Well, I would like to ask you to turn off your cameras and microphone until the question and answer portion of the event, and during the question and answers, and please ask questions by raising your hand and typing in the chat box. We'll try and keep this a lively discussion, and the recording, which I'm sure you've noticed, will be made available to all those that are registered in due time. We have an hour for the session, and if we have great fun, we can extend that a little bit. It can be one extendable hour. But I don't want to waste our precious time, but would then ask Ian Sean to start with his market overview. Ian, please go ahead.
Thank you, Árni, and thank you for moderating this session, and also a big thank you to all of those who are joining, especially to those who are not well. I know a number of you are a bit under the weather, as I currently am, so just to say, if I do develop a coughing fit and can't speak, I will mute, and my colleague David will kindly just seamlessly take over. And of course, I'd also like to add my own thanks to our supporters and sponsors of this session, which we arranged because we thought that timing was good for the following reasons. A number of UK retailers are supporting the responsible fishing vessel standard in their sourcing policies. As you can see here, the Consumer Goods Forum has developed a social benchmarking to cover certification schemes in processing and for vessels at sea. So the direction of policy and requirements from CGF members is very clear. And next slide, please, Sean. 5 major UK retailers signed up just before Christmas to the WWF basket metric measuring the impact from their operations and their supplies, and the seafood specific requirements here were a subject of discussion at a few industry meetings and forums, including the recently the Seafish CLG meeting. Within the WWF basket metrics, there are some important expectations for seafood. Next slide, Sean, which is slide 6, I believe. And we refer to 3. The first is a minimum expectation that all sources are covered by a relevant certification scheme. Secondly, a commitment to implement the PAS 1550 due diligence code throughout supply chains. This is stated twice. The due diligence code written by the Environmental Justice Foundation, WWF and Pew, as many of you will know, covering traceability, legality and social issues. And then number 3, a commitment to implement the responsible fishing vessel standard, which is actually stated 3 times in total. Now, we have observed comments that the PAS 1550 code is a very heavy lift for the industry. And one of the most important messages we want to get across today is that best seafood practices, next slide please, Sean. Best seafood practices are a program that addresses certification gaps in the capture sector, and the combination of our 2 relevant standards can help fast track supply chains through the PAS 1550 code. Of these 2 relevant standards, I will talk us quickly through the seafood processing standard for land facilities, and David will take the fishing vessel standard and then conclude with how the combination and best seafood practices can help fast track through the PAS 1550 code. Next slide, please, Sean. Slide 8, yeah. So the key point with the seafood processing standard is that it is seafood specific. And when compared to standards that can be used from other industries, it is unique in the comprehensive nature of the risks that it covers. Across quality management, food safety to a GFSI recognized level, traceability, ethical risk management, which has evolved in the seafood specific context from 18 clauses back in 2009 to well over 60 ethical clauses today. And the standard is currently undergoing the CGF Consumer Goods Forum Sustainable Supply Chain Initiative benchmarking. We do share the ethical audit data anonymously with specialist third parties to measure the effectiveness of these seafood specific ethical audits, and we also have a supply chain specific sharing system on audit performance, which is available online. And the final point here, the environmental management requirements, these are within the standard. These are industry leading. We know this because it is a common area for improvements to be required in effluent discharge, for example. So in summary, this standard is seafood specific. It is unique in the comprehensive coverage of the standard, which is important to communicate. And then when combined with our vessel standard and the value in the PAS 1550 context, it takes an even larger step change in what it offers. And I'll now hand over to David to take the lead herewith.
Great, thanks, Ian. Head to the next slide, Sean. Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining again. My name is David Dietz. I work in the Program Integrity Department of Global Seafood Alliance, working very specifically in our best seafood practices certification. And really my role is, ongoing standard development, assistance with audit, assistance with audit development and ongoing certification processes. So today, just going to quickly walk through our responsible fishing vessel standard certification and a little bit about how we see this certification and BSP overall integrating into the industry and helping you guys meet some of the growing expectations in the marketplace. So a quick overview of really what we see the responsible fishing vessel standard as. This is a certification that enables fishing operations to provide assurances of decent working conditions and operational best practices from catch to shore. What does that really mean for us? We see this as a comprehensive certification scheme. We see this as trying to look at everything on a vessel above the water. So looking outside of the fishery, making sure that the vessel is operating in a responsible manner in all capacities, from how it treats and employs its workers to how it manages its vessel for safety and ethical catch. Covering that whole scope of concepts just within the vessel. This is a global standard. The RFPS is the only vessel level certification at this time that is applicable across the globe and can be applied to any vessel in any geography. With that, it's highly accessible. We've developed this and updated it over time to make sure that it is applicable for any type of commercially licensed fishing vessel. So this covers any size, but also any fishing activity. So your gear type, your length at sea, we've adapted the standard to identify social risks and how those would fluctuate based on your individual fishing activities. And the standard will audit and cover the scope of your activities based on that. Additionally, we've tried to make this more inclusive by covering some other components of the industry, such as folding in tender and supply vessels into our group structure. So we do have a group certification model, and one of our ongoing updates is currently folding in tender and supply vessels. We've gotten a lot of feedback from the industry that it would be a challenge to certify groups without being able to include those as well. So we're constantly looking for ways to make this more accessible to the industry partners as well. Lastly, this is a very transparent standard. This has a rigorous governance process that we make publicly available on our website. At this time, we're currently in a public comment period for our issue 2.0 of the standard, which includes some of these recent additions. We encourage you to read and put in public comments if you have any as well. Sean, next slide, please. So the RFPS is broken into two main core principles. They kind of cover two separate pillars of vessel activity. So core principle one is vessel management and safety systems. This is really more of the physical structure of the vessel and making sure you're using best operational practices in regards to not just safety, but management of catch, management of gear, traceability, legality to operate, and a little bit of catch safety and food hygiene as well. So it covers the whole spectrum of all of your vessel management practices, and a lot of that relates to having documented policies and procedures that an auditor is able to quickly review and confirm that you've committed to best practices through these documented policies. Next slide again, please. And the other core principle is much more focused on the human side or the crew side. It is crew rights, safety, and well-being. So this goes into a lot of the people management of the vessel. Are you properly contracting and hiring all of your crew? Are they getting the proper amount of rest? Access to communication lines? Do they have accessible and transparent payments? Is there freedom of association? We've included some recent guidance on acceptable versions of youth labor on vessels, and what age limits are required, different unique risk assessments, and what is a absolute zero tolerance offense on a vessel as well. So it covers a really broad spectrum of all the human dimensions on board the vessel. And next slide again, please. And so a little bit about how we're trying to, really integrate this into the industry and fold it into an industry that has, regulations already built into it. And how do you take the RFPS and fold it in a way that would make more sense to the stakeholders? So we're very aware that there's other regulations and other programs out there that different vessel operators might be withholding to at the time. So the RFPS has been designed to acknowledge and incorporate many of those other regulations to reduce the burden on the user as much as possible. So we recognize that many national regulations could meet many of the RFPS requirements. However, we've also, through pilot and practice, learned that many national regulations do not fully meet the requirements of the RFPS and don't fully meet the expectations of the marketplace at this time. So it fluctuates on a national governance level, but the RFPS can work to incorporate many of your national regulations and reduce your audit burden based on what ongoing requirements you're already meeting through whatever country you're licensed through. Additionally, we also recognize that there are a number of other vessel standard programs out there. Again, we're the only ones that are able to cover the global reach at this time, but we're not trying to box anyone out of the marketplace. We recognize these other standards do a lot of great work, and we're constantly working to find co-recognition across these standards and another ways to increase efficiency. If you're already recognized here, what can we do to help improve efficiency on our end? So constantly looking for ways to recognize increased efficiencies and fold RFPS into some ongoing requirements within the industry. Next slide, please. Great. So really, the RFPS has been in a pilot model for the last 2 years as we've been developing not just the standard, but the group certification model and taking some lessons learned from pilot certifications and folding that into our updated RFPS 2.0 that's in public comment today. So as of now, we've issued 28 RFPS certificates. One of those is a large tuna group in the Philippines. As you can see, much of our work has been based in Europe, Southeast Asia, and Australia. And we do have 2 active certification bodies working with us right now. And these are the third-party certification bodies that have auditors to go do our vessel assessments. And lastly, we have 60 trained auditors in total. So at this stage, we're always looking to increase our auditor pool, but we do feel confident at this stage we can send auditors to any of the markets that are currently showing interest in RFPS certification. Next slide, please. A little bit about our accreditation and benchmarking. As I mentioned, always looking for recognition and some efficiencies in the industry. One of these, as Ian had mentioned, is the SSCI benchmarking, which we're currently looking to attain for both our processing and our at-sea operations. So I'll have you focus on the very bottom right chart here, the responsible fishing vessel standard. We are the first and currently only at-sea operation to apply for the SSCI benchmarking. We have already conducted our office visit with them. We're currently, it says we're in stage 2 of the office visit. That is done and has been accepted and approved. We're in our own public consultation period to approve the changes for our SSCI benchmarking, and then we will move into their public consultation. So I like to think that we're actually at sort of step 2.5, but for formal reasons, we're just at step 2, but we're in a good process of meeting our SSCI benchmarking. This will obviously help with a lot of industry recognition as well. Last slide for me, please, Sean. And a little bit about PAS 1550. I do know, obviously, many people in this call today are aware of this, and probably just as many are very interested in the implications of this for their work. For those not aware, PAS 1550 was developed support from Environmental Justice Foundation, Oceana, Pew, and WWF. It's intended to be used alongside existing regulations to help combat IUU fishing and other social issues in the commercial fishing industry. So it's an EU regulation that's specifying that there's a regulatory requirement to undertake due diligence on whether seafood which is caught or imported in the EU has been legally caught, transported, and processed. So really what they see this as a broader sort of not quite a standard, but a broader set of guidelines and regulations to help guide importers and processors through the full supply chain to ensure no IUU products are making it into European markets. Obviously, as Ian mentioned, we've gotten feedback that this can be quite an undertaking for people within all parts of the seafood industry in Europe. And as part of that, GSA has done a deep dive analysis on both our seafood processing standard and the responsible fishing vessel standard to see what that certification can do to assist with meeting the PAS 1550 requirements. So In that assessment, GSA determined the RFPS certification on its own fully or partially meets 50% of the PAS 1550 recommendations. Additionally, if you fold in the RFPS and an SPS certification combined, that can actually fully or partially meet 87% of the PAS 1550 requirements. So obviously these two certifications in total will not get you 100% to the recognition of PAS 1550. We find this to be an incredibly useful and pertinent tool in the marketplace right now to help you understand the requirements of PAS 1550 and get you an extremely long part of the way there towards meeting all of their recommendations and requirements. Next slide, Sean. So I think that covers it for the presentation portion. I will kick it back to Arnie for the Q&A. Thank you all for listening. And for the Q&A, again, it's Ian, myself, and our Director of Standards Development, Mike Platt, will also be on to help answer any other questions. So thank you again, and Arnie, back to you.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you very much, Ian, for a very comprehensive overview of the best seafood practices and the responsible fishing vessel standards. I must say, having been involved in this for this sort of kind of work for over 25 years, I find it amazing how well this has developed and how far we've gotten with it, and how much more secure our consumers must be with the products that they are buying now than before all this happened. I hope this doesn't sound like a member of a mutual appreciation society talking, but I really think this has been helpful for the relations between the producers, the traders, the retailers, and the consumer on the issue. But what matters is not what I think, but what you think, and whether you think this is useful and what questions you have. So we are now open for questions to those three gentlemen that are here. And you can open your videos and you can put your hands up, those that have questions to ask.
Arnie, whilst we're waiting for people to formulate their questions, I wonder if Mike or David could just comment a little more about the work that was done against the PAS 1550 code, that we're covering nearly 90% in full or in part. What does that mean? Perhaps you could put a bit more flesh on that for us.
Mike, would you be?
Yeah, I think that'd be a great question for Mike. He was an integral part of the team doing that assessment work, so I'll leave it to him.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Arnie. Thanks, David. Yes, this piece of work, what we were first invited by the producers of PAS 1550, the NGOs, if we would support and give some evidence about how the RFPS criteria in the first instance would support in supply chains wishing to align with PAS 1550. So we did this, I think it would be back in 2020. So that was independently validated by the NGO supporters of PAS 1550. And we then, that's how we got the 57%. So there are a number of different areas within PAS 1550 which are not related to fishing vessels, so that the parts that were, the RFPS certainly would support supply chains wishing to align with PAS 1550. What we then did within GSA is we looked at SPS, and because this is a best seafood practice program, if you combine the two standards together, we then re-looked at PAS 1550 with SPS, because there's a specific section in PAS 1550 around factories, so section 5. And again, we looked at it again, And from that, we actually managed to, if you put the two together, we'd meet in part or in full 87%. So before we could actually make that claim, we actually passed that back to the NGO supporters of PASS 1550, and they independently verified that they agreed with the benchmark work we did. And the benchmark work was actually going through each area of PASS 1550 against each clause within either SPS or RFPS. So it was quite an extensive piece of work. Hopefully, Ian, that helps you, answers your question.
Thank you, Mike. I've got two questions here in the chat. The first one from Mike Bertha, and he asks, is the remaining 13% from the PASS 1550 due to port assurances? David, are you familiar with this?
I think Mike went off mute. I'll let him take that if he had an answer prepared.
Yeah, the majority would be. I think if we looked at the port elements, Arnie, we get it up to around about 93, 94%. So if we looked at the port segment within the supply chain and combined everything, we'd get to about 93, 94%. There will, of course, be some areas which are covered within the fisheries and fisheries management. So again, that's where we would actually link back to GSSI approved certification programs.
Okay, so that links will be helpful in this context. And the second question that we have now is from Konstantin Skurovsky, and goes as follows. Could you say a few words about sticks and carrots for fishing vessel ship owners to use the RFPS? I don't know who would like to answer that of the team.
I'm happy to answer. Konstantin, could you elaborate on sticks and carrots a little more? I apologize.
That's a classic, Konstantin. You're muted.
I lost the question. What's the question was?
Could you elaborate on what you meant by the sticks and carrots for fishing?
I mean, what kind of incentives for people who are ship owners of fishing vessels to use this standard?
Yeah,
Because often,
great question.
yeah.
I think two layers to that, really. The one from just purely the vessel owner side, not even considering the marketplace, is we're considering this a social assurance to the marketplace or to the vessel as well. So you're not only sending out assurances to market buyers that might be more interested in your product, it's also an assurance to your crew and your own vessel operations that you're eliminating risk of both IUU and non-traceable products, but also social risks and health and safety risks on board the vessel as well, which can have massive monetary and operational implications if you have crew members overboard or occasionally die at sea, things of that nature. These can have major implications to ongoing fishing practices if you're not maintaining safe, healthy, and a workplace that also has high level of social integrity for workers' rights as well. A type of vessel that workers want to come back to. Returning crew can often be a great asset to a vessel as well. So I think that's one layer. And then the other one, which I think is quite obvious as well, is as a marketplace is becoming more and more interested in folding in social requirements into this industry, the RFPS is a great tool to demonstrate that assurance to the marketplace and show that your vessel is meeting operational best practices at sea.
Konstantin, are you happy with that answer?
Yeah, I'm happy, but what should we do in the case if the market is not sensitive to all these questions?
Yeah, sure. I think we are seeing globally a growing interest and requirement of these social needs within the marketplace. It's definitely something that we're seeing increased pressure, and Europe has definitely been a global leader in rolling out these requirements. So I think that need will continue to grow over time and will continue to create an argument for this. But just beyond the marketplace, I think just going back to the level of assurance this can place on not just a vessel owner, but the groups that apply as well. We've seen the group model allows, it requires you to put a management structure in place and requires you to publish and sign on to a detailed set of policies and procedures. It's something that we call a central management system. So it actually can help, modernize and operationalize a lot of fleets as well, and fold in some more modern, management tactics and documentation that the industry is starting to expect it well, which again, lead to what we see as better efficiencies, better safety, better worker rights in the industry.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, David. We are very lucky to have with us a representative from the fishing company Reykdal, which have just recently had one of their cold water prawn trawlers certified to the responsible fishing vessel standards. The Merike, which is actually registered in Tallinn in Estonia, but the Reykdal company is domiciled here in Reykjavik. Anita, ertu þarna, heyrir í mér?
Hello, já, ég heyri þér.
Hello, Anita.
Hello, hi.
Yeah, yes.
Hi.
Could you tell us about your experience and your company's experience on certifying the Merike?
Sure. Overall, just a good experience. The auditor was very professional and made it very pleasant to go through this. And I mean, there are some classes of like some of the requirements in the standard is something that is also in regulations, but we just showed her the certificates and she just took that into yeah. Sorry, I wasn't expecting to be speaking. But it's really nice to be able to show that we are doing everything we can for our fishermen, and they keep coming to our vessels. And yeah.
So you already have experience of the certification being respected by the inspectors.
Sorry?
So you already have an experience of the certification being respected by the inspectors. Eftirlitsmennirnir viðurkenni skráninguna.
No, not yet, but it's still to be recognized by people. But it's good to have, because there are so many people talking about bad treatment of fishermen on vessels. So it's good to show that we have like this, to show that this is not correct. That we, yeah. Yes.
Very good.
Arnie, can I just comment there? Because I think Anita raised kind of
Yes,
like a real
please.
life example of what David covered. And I go back to that chart where the way in which we set up our program is to recognize where regulations are good, where systems are good. We will put a formal recognition in place and fast track those sections through the audit and concentrate on the differences and the gaps that our RFPS brings. So yeah, what Anita said there actually is a real life example and very important one.
Excellent. The PAS 1550 Is there anybody that has experience of going through that, or is planning to go through that in the audience? I could share their experience with us. No. We have one additional question here in the chat. It's from Gisli Gislason, and it goes as follows: do you expect vessels from the Western world, like in the North Atlantic, Canada, Greenland, Iceland, Faroes, Norway, will need to do improvement to pass their requirements?
I can cover that. That's a great question. Thank you. And something we've actually had a lot of learnings about in the pilot process. So the answer is yes, generally, but it's not really. What we found is that a lot of Western and honestly, a lot of Eastern fisheries as well, I would say that across the world, a fairly consistent theme is that a lot of the more sophisticated fishing companies and fishermen out there are using a lot of the best practices that we're requiring through the RFPS, a lot of just the day-to-day operations. However, one of the largest gaps we're seeing in our vessel audits across the world, but also in these Western nations as well, is a lack of documenting these policies and procedures, and lack of formalizing a lot of this stuff. And so we'll get feedback from a lot of people being audited saying, yes, I'm following the recruitment policy that you have laid out in your standard, but I don't have it written out and signed by my crew members. I have I do the right level of training at sea that you require, but I don't have a formal training policy. So what a lot of it is that we've learned is bringing some of these fishing vessels up to the marketplace expectation of just being able to follow a document trail and getting them to have all the policies and procedures in one central location. An auditor or anyone else can come in and verify this vessel's practices quickly and efficiently, and hold them against it. So not a ton, it varies by vessel to vessel, obviously, but overall, what we've seen so far is most vessels are meeting the standard intent of what the RFPS is trying to do. It's really getting them to formalize it in a documentation and written policy context to actually pass an audit. So that's, a lot of the work has come on our end of how to support that, how to help them understand what that requirement means and what this documentation should really look like so that they can kind of meet these marketplace expectations. Thank you. Great question. And Mike, yeah, if you have some follow-up to that, please.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I think, Gisli, that's a great question. I think one of the things that we did find is that there are some really great regulations in place by some of these Western countries. And I think one of the big challenges we find is that the consistency with how the regulators actually interpret sometimes their own regulations. So we've actually found some vessels where they should have actually been meeting some of the requirements of the RFPS, but they weren't. So from a marketplace position, what we're doing with the RFPS is because it's an independent third-party certification, we're giving that assurance to the supply chain that it's been independently audited. So it doesn't matter if a vessel's in Norway, Canada, Greenland, etc. They're all being audited to the same standard. So you can get that consistency of message. I think the other thing as well is, especially with some of the ILO, the fundamental conventions and ILO C188, these have been adopted by a number of countries, but on speaking with ILO, there's sometimes a bit of variation on how these are actually incorporated within fishing fleets. So again, the RFPS will try and create that benchmark so it's a level playing field from all these vessels. So creates a clear message for the market.
Very good, very clear. Any further questions? No.
Arnie, can I just go back to one of Con's questions, if I may, if no one's got another question? You're asking about, the benefits to the fleet and why they should go for RFPS. I think one of the very first vessels that actually got certified to the RFPS, they were actually very proud of actually having an independent third party assessing them. They always thought they were doing a great job, but they wanted that independent third party just to give that assurance. And I think also some of the first movers within this program, are really passionate fishers. They do a really great job. And one of the big challenges they've got is actually recruiting and actually who are the next generation of fishers coming through. So again, if you see vessels that are putting themselves forward or fleets putting themselves forward for certification, that should give assurance, to potential crew members that, they're really operating at a very high standard, really want to respect their crew members. And again, it could be a way of trying to entice some of our younger generation to actually look at fishing again. I know in the UK, the average fisher is 57. And that's why we're currently looking around about 30% of the Scottish fleet is actually been manned by foreign crew members. So again, if we can actually try and educate and show that this is a real professional industry, we could attract some really good talent back into it.
Thank you.
Yes.
Mike.
Konstantin? Further comments, Konstantin?
Oh, yeah. I also wondering about the same thing in some countries where fishery is very well developed. For example, in the United States, I've heard some complaints from Lisa Murkowski, for example, who is a senator for Alaska. She asked why we need this bloody certification for vessels, for our fleet. We have a best fishing in the world, and we have our own system pretty well. Why this bloody MSC, for example, is assessing our vessels, our fishing operations? We don't need it at all. And he complained it in meeting with Walmart, with senior people from Walmart, and asked why you demanding MSC. I'm afraid that the same story could happen with responsible fishing vessel standard in some places. This is why I'm asking about market incentives mostly, whether big partners of alliance are able to support it and strongly confirm that we need it, we definitely require it, and so on. Sorry for my long speech.
No, I think this is a very, very good comment, Konstantin, and it's really the original question for all the certification systems that we have been putting up in the last 25 years. And I think, in fact, that the experience has answered Lisa on this question. It is because the consumers want it, and in part it is distrust of governments. Governments have not lived up to the expectations, both in fisheries management and in the inspection systems of fishing vessels, not to mention IUU fishing and the human rights abuses that are linked to that. And these are things that are of great concern to the consumers. And I'm sure some of the retailers amongst us could sort of fill in regarding their experience in this regard. We have a question from our cloak, please.
Hello there, my name's Robin Cloak. I'm part of Labouré Fine Foods, or the fisheries representative for Labouré Fine Foods, or Lion Seafoods known in the UK. I'd just like to say, Konstantin, it's a really good point, and it's often when we've been talking to our supply base and sort of trying to explain about RFPS certification, the assurance that we need is there with RFPS, and I take your point where there are a lot of good management structures in place, there's enforcement in countries, but can I just draw your attention to a very recent article that came out to do with condemning Ireland's migrant fishing worker scheme, where Ireland is meant to be one of the more comprehensive, I'd say, fishing fleets, but yet still within that there was a report on modern slavery and trafficking in persons, that sort of thing. And I think with the certification, it still gives us the assurance that this isn't happening within our fleet. So I think we would be naive to think that it's not that everyone is playing by the rules, everyone is doing this, and we want, from a UK perspective, from a retailer's perspective, this is a way that you can show us fantastic best practice. Thank you very much. I hope that was clear and concise. I'm not used to talking in large groups, so thank you for listening.
This is very clear and concise, Robin. Thank you very much. And it comes back to, in a slightly different way, to what Ian was talking about earlier, that there are gaps. And by doing this, we are trying to fill in the gaps and provide further assurance to those that want to do business with us in the value chain all the way through to the consumer.
If I can just comment on this, is Ian.
Please, Ian. Please.
Yeah, just referring back to, and thank you, Robin, for those comments. Just for the, for the most important messages from the marketplace. Is my 2 slides, was it 2 or 3 slides? At the very beginning, whether it be retailer in the UK, retailer policies themselves, or in a more global context, the fact that the Consumer Goods Forum has a benchmarking for this. It wouldn't develop a benchmarking unless its members had key concerns. And then again, in the UK context currently, and we know from WWF that there's, they're possibly looking at other countries as time goes on, but the 5 retailers who have signed up to the basket metric system and the requirements for the PAS 1515 code. So it's about looking at this holistically as a program in total to meet those requirements. And those messages from the marketplace, to the producers are crystal clear.
Thank you, Ian. Well, any more comments?
I think just one last comment, if I may, Arnie, with regard to what Ian was saying with regard to the BSP program. I think what the RFPS will do, if you talk to a number of supply chain actors further down the supply chain, is when you say, well, which fishing vessels do you actually get your catch from? There's sometimes that opaque area that they're not sure. They know the fishery, but they're not always sure about the fisher themselves. The RFPS will actually, give greater granularity within the supply chain, greater transparency. So the end user can be assured that if they ask for certifications along BSP or other vessel certification programs, they will know it's undergone some form of third-party assessment, and they'll be able to understand exactly where that fishing vessel is operating as well. And that's one of the key reasons why we put in the RFPS. We put in the traceability section. We also put in the legality section to make sure that they, had all the right permits to operate in the fisheries where they were working. So again, what we're trying to do here is we're giving information, and in fairness, what we're doing is we're rewarding good practice. And there are, as I say, there are a lot of very good fishers out there, and it is achievable. And fishers have said to me, well, we can do this standard. And as David put it, the biggest challenge sometimes is they've all got it in their heads, but they don't keep the documentation. So in a way, this is an educational program as well, to give them greater evidence to show their due diligence to the supply chain.
Well, excellent, Mike. We don't have to stay the hour, but if there are further questions, we're happy to answer.
Sorry, it's me again. Regarding transparency and chain of custody, how we should be assured that some illegal IUU fish is not mixed with legal catch. In case of overfishing, for example, vessel is fishing officially, they have a license, they have a certificate of origin, but instead of 1,000 or 10,000 metric tons of fish, they caught 20% more. And they use legal documents to justify that all their fish is caught legally and so on and so forth. How we could assess it on the shore? Is it a blockchain or what kind of mechanism? A barcode and so on.
Yeah, no, that's
somebody.
It's a great question. I think it's a very forward-looking question for us. It's something that we're very aware of and excited about diving into, like, as the program evolves. So, you know, the unit of certification for the RFPS is, you know, the vessel and the vessel owner itself. It's not certifying the catch itself from a, you know, a unit perspective. I think we are, you know, actively considering ways to develop a traceability tool through RFPS into the plants. I think we've got a clear, you know, chain of custody mapped out. As Ian showed, it's a very straight line that you can draw from the fishery to the vessel to the processor, and, you know, working using, as you mentioned, technology, whether it be blockchain or other, you know, data platforms moving forward to monitor that, I think is something that GSA is very interested in and is trying to decide and figure out, you know, what the best path forward is for the industry to meet marketplace expectations. We don't want to dive in and start offering tools that aren't necessarily required or demanded at the time. It's a very good question. I think it's something that's very much on our minds. We don't have anything formal to, you know, discuss in that regard at this point, but it is definitely a topic of active conversation within GSA as well. Thank you.
Yes, I'm sure that this would be a very interesting topic to discuss, and port authorities and fisheries researchers would be very interested to take part in it, because it obviously has to do with registering the landed catch, which is of importance to the port authorities as they levy the charges on the catch, and also of great value to the fisheries researchers, because they get a lot of their information when they are giving advice about the total allowable catch based on the landings and the analysis of the catch that has been landed with regards to size and age, as well as the volume. So it's a very interesting topic to discuss.
Yes, Arne, actually, we had a similar problem with Alaska pollock in the Sea of Ojotsk. We objected. I was a director of Sustainable Fishery Program of WWF Russia, and we objected to certification because there was a lot of facts of discard of juveniles. Mm-hmm. And obvious overfishing occurred. And CAC assessed, but the actual catch was assessed calculating using coefficient of final products without any assessment of discard of juveniles. And it definitely was a reason for overfishing, because Japanese market is buying and European market is buying fillet and caviar, but they do not like juveniles. They do not know, fishermen do not know what to do with that. This is why we objected. And also observers, they do not have documentation which estimate their rights and duties. So captain could easily say that to observers that you could see in your cabin, you have no right to make pictures, you have no right to be on deck, and so on and so forth. This is why we thought about it. This is why I'm asking those questions.
It's a-
Sorry.
Yeah, it's a good, and it brings up a good point, Konstantin, that I guess we have not really mentioned before. And earlier in my presentation, I did mention that BSP as a program is really focused on the operations above the water. We're not trying to certify fisheries. We feel that there's plenty of places doing that very well right now, and we're not trying to duplicate work. With that, what GSA recognizes as responsible fisheries are those benchmarked to the GSSI standards. So we, in terms of a BSP supply chain recognizing BSP fisheries throughout, they do need to be sourced from a GSSI benchmark fisheries. That does cover a number of recognized fishery sustainability standards out there. So again, we're not trying to recreate any work, but we are trying to fold in some of the sort of globally recognized tools out there to combat some of the more fishery level issues in terms of stock status, fishing activity, discards, juvenile takes, things of that nature. So, it's just trying to layer in, and this is, again, as Ian has mentioned, we're trying to fill the gaps and cover the places in the supply chain that we feel that there aren't the right assurances. On the fishery side, we feel that a lot of those assurances are being met through many of these other certification schemes. That was not an area that we wanted to repeat in. So we've got plenty of great tools out there that we can use as a base platform to fold in the vessel and the processing standards. So hopefully that helps a little bit as well.
Oh, thank you, David.
I'll just add to that don't forget that seafood processing standard as well has a whole chapter on traceability management. I forget how many pages it is, but it's very detailed and seafood specific. And Mike, you can probably talk about the traceability, or David, the traceability elements within RFPS as well.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike, if you want.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, when we were developing, looking at, what traceability criteria or the key data elements do we need. So we actually looked at GDS2, which is a global dialogue for seafood traceability, and the work that they've been doing. So I think it's very much the supply chain is looking at that particular program as well. And I think there is a number of good information around traceability systems and what type of evidence or information different stages of the supply chain will need to provide to give that assurance. So I think it's, as you say, it's a start of a journey. I think traceability is important. And I think one of the other things that we did look at, and we do include on the application for any vessels coming into the program, is we do ask for them, how, the tonnage of of fish that they land and from the fisheries. I mean, we keep that confidential at the moment, but it'd certainly be useful as we try and do mass balance exercises or volume reconciliation of species going through the supply chain from certified vessels back to certified fisheries. But there's a long way to go. And as I say, it's an important point. And I certainly do think it's something that needs to be addressed through some form of digital format. So we have real-time information for the supply chain. But as I say, I think it's still work in progress.
Well, very good. Thank you, Mike. There's one brick in the wall, as we say. So if there are no further questions, we have filled the hour. That's usually the case when you're discussing fisheries, in my experience. I would then like to thank all of you for turning up and taking part in the meeting and the discussion and listening to the speakers. And we hope to be able to answer questions if you have any further on a one-to-one basis. And did we put up the addresses of David and Ian and Mike?
Maybe Sean, you could just bring up slide 16.
Sean, yes, the slide. I think we had that prepared.
And it'll be a presentation we send out as well.
Okay. So we'll be happy to hear from you directly, and there it is. And we'll endeavor to reply to your questions. And if there is nobody that wants to say a final word, and I will close the meeting for today and wish you a good afternoon and a good evening. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you all.
Thanks you all.
Thank you.
Ciao.
See you. Bye.